If time could be reversed, would you survive? This question is often asked as a test of strength, intelligence, or endurance. But in Edinburgh, in the year 1700, survival was not a matter of ability. It was a matter of circumstance. Viewed through the lens of modern reconstruction technology, Edinburgh reveals itself not simply as an old city, but as a vast biological trap. Humanity was compressed into towering stone tenements, rising 10 to 14 stories high, sealed within defensive walls that allowed no escape outward. Life was stacked vertically, layered tightly, with no room to retreat. Here, the distance between privilege and decay was measured not in streets, but in inches of stone. The aristocracy and the destitute shared the same air, the same walls, the same contamination, separated only by floors, not by safety. This raises a harder question than survival. If you had been born here, would you have had any choice at all? How does a population learn to breathe air thick with rot, drink water drawn from death-filled pools, and continue without losing its mind? Perhaps the answer is not resilience, but inevitability. Perhaps endurance was not chosen, it was imposed. We do not return to this city to pass judgment. We return because only now, protected by modern sanitation, medicine, and distance, are we finally safe enough to look directly at what this place truly was. Guided by reconstruction algorithms, this journey is not about nostalgia or spectacle. It is about confronting a reality that once shaped human lives at every breath, every step, every day. Stay close. Because in Edinburgh, 1700, survival was never guaranteed and escape was never an option. The Royal Mile morning, 1700. Everything begins here, on the Royal Mile. Do not mistake this street for a forgotten slum. This is the ceremonial spine of the city, where power, learning, and prestige are meant to present themselves to the world. Yet beneath that appearance lies a surface churned into mud. A dense mixture of waste, animal remains, and household refuse pressed into the ground by decades of footsteps. There is no clean pavement beneath you, only soft, uneven earth that absorbs everything poured onto it. Open gutters line the edges of the street, carrying thick, sluggish streams downhill. Water pools where it should never remain. Shoes soak through within minutes. Skin stays damp in the cold air, steeped in decay long after the body has left the street. Smoke from coal fires and kitchen stoves has nowhere to escape. Trapped between tall stone walls and narrow corridors, it hangs in the air, forming a stagnant yellow haze. It settles into the lungs. It dulls the senses. It becomes part of the body. And yet, this is what makes the place truly unsettling. The most frightening thing is not the stench. It is that no one reacts to it anymore. When an entire generation is born into filth, filth no longer registers as disaster. Decay becomes routine. Disease becomes background noise. What would overwhelm a stranger in minutes has been absorbed into daily life. Look around you. People move with purpose. Trades are conducted. Conversations continue. Inside the taverns lining the Royal Mile, scholars debate philosophy, morality, and the nature of reason itself. Ideas that will later shape the Enlightenment are spoken aloud in rooms thick with smoke and contaminated air. Here lies the contradiction at the heart of the city. Minds engaged in the highest questions of human existence inhabit conditions that steadily dismantle the human body. Medical knowledge in 1700 offers no protection. Germs are unknown. Infection is invisible. A minor cut or scratch picked up on this street rarely heals cleanly. It swells, festers, and quietly becomes fatal days later, long after the moment of injury has been forgotten. Death does not arrive with drama. It arrives as habit. Life expectancy in these overcrowded districts barely reaches 30 years. Children die young. Chronic illness is expected. Yet the Royal Mile does not see itself as dangerous. It remains imposing, confident, convinced of its own importance. The city continues to function, not because it is safe, but because it has learned to ignore what is killing it. The Royal Mile is not merely a street. It is the symbol of a society that has normalized its own slow destruction. Loch Midday, 1700. Leaving the crowded spine of the Royal Mile requires only a short walk north, yet the city's character changes immediately. At the foot of Edinburgh Castle lies Loch. The name suggests water, perhaps even calm. The reality is far more severe. This is not a lake in any meaningful sense. Loch is the city's final reservoir, a place where gravity gathers everything the streets above discard. Waste from the towering tenements flows downward without interruption. What remains is a thick, motionless mass of blackened water, broken only by the slow release of decay beneath the surface. The stench announces the place long before it comes into view. It carries across the city, heavy and unavoidable. But the most disturbing reality is not the smell itself, it is how closely life continues beside it. The poorest residents of Edinburgh gather along the water's edge. They wash their clothes here. They lower their hands into the black surface and draw water for daily use. Not because they believe it is safe, but because there is nothing else. No one chooses Loch. Loch is what remains when every other choice has disappeared. Within this dark flow lie animal carcasses, hospital waste, and the invisible seeds of epidemic diseases, typhoid, cholera, and countless infections whose causes remain unknown to those forced to endure them. The very substance that carries illness is also the last fragile thread holding daily survival together. Loch also becomes a stage for fear. When sickness spreads without explanation, society searches for meaning. Lacking knowledge, it turns to blame. And blame always seeks the weakest. Women accused of witchcraft are brought here and thrown into the polluted water. A cruel logic governs their fate. If they sink, they are innocent. If they float, they are guilty. But the truth is far darker. The toxins concentrated in the Loch often kill long before any verdict can be claimed. In moments like these, Loch reflects more than contamination. It reflects panic. It reflects a community struggling to explain suffering it cannot understand. Edinburgh in 1700 does not separate itself from its waste. It lives beside it, breathes it in, and relies upon it. Loch stands as a monument not only to environmental collapse, but to the psychological breaking point of a society trapped between survival and despair. The closes late afternoon, 1700. Step away from the Royal Mile and enter one of the closes. These narrow, plunging alleys cut sideways through the city, funneling people into spaces never meant to hold so many lives. Towering stone walls rise on either side, blocking light, trapping air, and pressing inward with every step. Here, privacy does not fade, it disappears. Population density reaches a level that borders on suffocation. Entire families are compressed into single rooms. Within one vertical tower, a rigid social order unfolds. The wealthy occupy the middle floors, high enough to escape the worst of the street's stench, yet low enough to avoid the leaking roofs above. Craftsmen live below them. The poorest are forced upward into damp attic spaces, or downward into airless cellars where light rarely enters. In this sealed environment, air becomes communal property. Every breath carries the residue of another body. The smell of sweat, cheap alcohol, sickness, and decay circulates endlessly, recycled through narrow corridors and thin walls. Here, you are no longer a distinct individual. You are part of a crowd breathing through a single lung. Water is scarce. Cleanliness becomes unthinkable. Clothing is worn for months without washing, layered thick with grime. Human bodies are treated no differently. Woolen garments soaked with sweat provide ideal ground for lice and fleas. They move freely from body to body, not as irritations, but as carriers of disease. Illness spreads silently. A cough echoes down the stone corridor and is answered by another. Infection travels without resistance. And when someone collapses in these alleys, few stop to help, not because they are cruel, but because stopping today may mean lying there tomorrow. In a place where survival demands constant movement, compassion becomes a risk few can afford. Pain is not ignored out of indifference, but out of exhaustion. The closes do not simply confine the body. They dissolve identity. They strip away the illusion of separation between one life and the next. By the time daylight begins to fade, what remains is not a collection of individuals, but a mass of lives bound together by shared air, shared disease, and shared vulnerability. And as darkness approaches, these narrow passages prepare to conceal far more than crowding alone. Gardyloo Nightfall. 1700. Stop here. Remain where you are. It is nearly 10 o'clock at night in Edinburgh. In 1700, darkness brings no rest. The narrow closes are barely lit by a few flickering oil lamps, their light swallowed by stone walls slick with moisture. From a distance, the hollow bells of St. Giles's Church begin to toll, marking the end of the working day. And then a single word cuts through the air. Gardyloo. This is not merely a warning. It is a ritual. In a city compressed inward, where sanitation systems do not yet exist and private disposal is impossible, this moment becomes the only collective release. Across the tenements, windows open. Buckets are lifted, and without hesitation, they are emptied. Thousands of vessels, each holding a full day's human waste from families stacked floor upon floor, are hurled downward into the darkness below. Black torrents cascade through the narrow air shafts of the closes, transforming them into funnels that collect the accumulated filth of entire buildings. No single person is responsible, because everyone participates. If you do not react in time, if you fail to shout back, to step aside, then the city's reality pours directly onto you. There is no apology, there is no pause, the act is too normalized to question. Within moments, the Royal Mile and its surrounding alleys become an open-air repository of waste. The stench reaches its absolute peak, a suffocating concentration of decay so dense it overwhelms the senses. What remains is not chaos, but routine. By morning, street cleaners will scrape away what is visible. But most of it has already sunk deep into the mud below, waiting for the next rainfall to carry it back into the city's cycle of contamination. Gardyloo is not an accident of the past. It is a system created in the absence of one. This nightly ritual reveals how a society manages its consequences, by distributing responsibility so widely that guilt disappears. The city does not confront its waste, it releases it, together, and moves on. The prison and the poorhouse midnight. 1700. As the last streams from the nightly Gardyloo ritual begin to dry on the streets, the city turns its attention to those who can no longer endure its demands. This is not a hospital. It is the prison and the poorhouse institutions designed not to heal, but to contain. In the darkness of the Scottish night, the structure rises like a stone vault, heavy and impenetrable. Inside, the air is cold, damp, and thick with neglect. Historical records describe spaces where bodies are stacked as tightly as the city that produced them. In Edinburgh, in 1700, poverty is not treated as misfortune. It is treated as failure, and failure is treated as a crime. Here, human worth is measured with brutal efficiency. It does not rest on character, dignity, or need. It rests on a single question: how long can you continue to work? When the answer becomes unclear, the body is removed from the streets and placed here, out of sight. The living conditions reflect this logic. Food arrives as thin gruel made from spoiled grain. Sleep comes on rotting wooden planks. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder for warmth. Illness spreads easily. Privacy no longer exists, even in death. Is there a greater cruelty than being denied the right to suffer alone, when even your final breath must mingle with the damp air of a room filled with strangers who are themselves waiting to disappear? By morning, carts roll through the streets. They do not carry aid or relief. They collect the bodies of those who did not survive the night. Cold, silent, and unnamed, The dead are stacked without ceremony, treated no differently than the refuse removed hours earlier. The city has extracted all remaining value from these lives, and when nothing more can be taken, it disposes of them efficiently, without pause. Modern cities have learned to hide places like this. Their walls are cleaner, their language is softer, but the question remains, have we truly abandoned this way of thinking? Or have we simply moved it out of sight? Conclusion. The moral afterimage. The ideas that would later ignite the Enlightenment did not emerge from comfort. They were born in pressure. They rose from overcrowded rooms, poisoned air, and bodies worn down by conditions that could no longer be endured. From streets where survival demanded adaptation, not choice. From a city where every breath carried risk and endurance was mistaken for strength. Edinburgh in 1700 was not only a place of filth and suffering, it was also a place where the human mind was pushed to its limits, and it is often at those limits that ideas begin to change the world. The past does not vanish, it settles. It lingers beneath layers of stone and progress, quietly shaping what comes after. Today, clean water flows without thought. Air can be drawn deeply into the lungs without fear. These comforts feel natural, almost invisible. Yet they exist because generations before lived without them, not by choice, but by necessity. So when you take a breath of clean air today, remember this. There was once a city where every breath was a gamble with death. Standing before modern Edinburgh, ask yourself what you truly see. An ancient capital restored? Or the shadows of those who endured the black mud of 1,700 so that something better could eventually rise? Leave your thoughts below. And join us as we continue uncovering history not as nostalgia, but as a mirror through the lens of reconstruction, memory, and truth.